First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me to speak here. And I apologize if you will have a feeling of a déjà vu in a minute, because obviously when Steve was doing the functional description of the site, he covered all of the funerary material as well. But he had the better photos, so you already saw the better photos, and now let me just go on with that. Generally, I come from a background in studies of Roman burial customs in Egypt too, and when I first came to Bérénice as a trained supervisor 16 years ago, I was told I was going to dig a gate or fortifications. Well, that was close, because the gate was actually a few meters away, but I ended up digging a necropolis, the first one ever found in Bérénice as a formal cemetery. And that is what Bérénice does. It gives you what you wish for. So what I want to do today is, since I haven't had the opportunity to go further into this material over these recent years, we haven't been able to excavate the cemetery further. But the evidence for burials has been mounting with practically every season, a new burial or burials appearing. So I'd like to give you an overview of that with my thoughts on the situation. First of all, as you already got the gist of that, there's, besides the human burials, of course, the animal burials. The two maps are intended to show where these burials are found. And the animal burials are, as you heard, in the trash, but also in one other place, which is also a midden site, basically. Meaning all the numbers in yellow, those are the places where the animal burials have been found. And here, the numbers in green, those are trenches in which human burials have been found. As you see, they are much more spread over the whole site. Just to give you an idea of the combined set, altogether, as Stephen said, there's practically 100 animal burials already from that small area of the trash dump, while altogether we have 18 human skeletons from the whole site, including the formal cemetery that I will be talking about in a minute. And we cover the full range of almost the full range, because we don't have anything that can be considered a burial from the Ptolemaic, early Ptolemaic period, from the time that the fort was established. But we do have from the early Roman period through the very late period. First of all, the context in which these burials are found. These are, when you look at them comprehensively, it seems that the idea was to find a piece of soft ground in which you could dig a grave pit with no architecture of any kind. And when you know the stratigraphy of the site, it can be difficult with very hard deposits, salt encrusted. So basically, the best places where you could find, when the best places where you can easily dig a grave is like a trench left by those who are robbing a wall, or a cistern, abandoned cistern filled with sand. And that is the case in here, where there's a tower place where the only place where on the top where you could have a burial. And here also at the end, at the edge of a salvage trench left by robbing the old wall. In the case of the trash deposits, there's a deep layer of sand, sterile, culturally sterile sand, in which these burials were placed. The kinds of burials, of course, the first one I show you shows the difficult situation, the difficult conditions of the site. This one is completely disturbed. It was right near the surface, and regular washing by rain, flooding, left it in this situation. However, those that were recognized, there's the one that was in the cistern, and it was in a sort of flexed fetal position. And another one that was buried in for no reason, because he was just in the sand. like this, which could mean that it was a secondary burial with the bones being, or the body at least, placed in a bag, for instance, a sack, which did not survive. So this is just pure speculation, and that is why he was in this strange position. However, most of the burials are in extended position, supine, and while there is no general rule about the orientation, what can be said is that for the most part, they were oriented east-west, with the head mostly to the west. And we have those, we have one example, or I think two, right? Two examples of burials which are decapitated, meaning the head is not there and was not there from the beginning, judging by the stratigraphy. The stratigraphy of the burial as such. This particular gentleman also lost part of the foot. It is possible that this is the work of animals, simply because the graves were so shallow and not protected. There is no reason to think that, although this has been floated in the past, there is no reason to think that this was decapitation as punishment according to Roman law, because Roman law in Egypt did not allow that. So if this is decapitation, it's according to different rules. This cemetery, which Steve showed to you just now from the last season, this is a formal cemetery from the early Roman period, the first that has been found. Those burials which I have just showed you were just strewn around across the site in different places without any special planning. However, here, all the things that I have talked about are repeated, but it looks more like a regular cemetery, because these three graves that have been excavated so far, and there are more there, do use an area where it is easier to dig the grave pit, but then the grave pits are here regular, something that could be discerned while digging. And they may have been covered. The evidence is not clear, but if gypsum anhydride had been used, that kind of smearing on the surface could have been what is found in the Eastern Desert, meaning just a layer of stones covering the top of the grave. Okay. You have seen this just now, but the new thing is that you can see the necklaces that the older man had. Okay. There's the amount of beads shows that there might have been two necklaces which were very similar. They had carnelian and amethyst beads, and some of the local stone and agate striped beads. And there is much to say that they are Indian and they are early Roman period, at least. Whether that means, I would be very careful about saying whether this suggests that the man was Indian, but surely he had contacts and preferred that kind of decoration, not usually typical of the Romans in Egypt. He also had, and many of these burials had smudges. You can't call them textiles, because in these conditions, unlike the trash, the textile does not preserve. There's just a smudging along the bones that could suggest that there was a shroud or textiles, clothes of any kind. This man seems to have had a long tunic, because the smudges go all the way the length of his body. Both of them had metal rings, the kind of iron rings with little keys that were used as for lockets, for small caskets of documents, for instance. And there are laws about who can wear which kind of rings. According to Roman law, iron rings were specific to certain groups, apparently. And these are the two males from our burials, from this cemetery, I mean. And the third one is the female that you just saw. And apart from the piece of amphora that was placed over her head, which somebody suggested looks very much like a, one of those masks of the late period in Egypt, apart without the decoration, of course, just an idea. But the other thing that is important is that on the abdomen she had a piece of stone, shaped stone, definitely placed there on purpose. The other burial, which was just nearby, discovered in the first season, then considered ptolemaic, or at least covered, she has the abdomen covered with a ptolemaic sherd. Right now, there is every reason to believe that this burial belongs to the same horizon as the three that I just showed you. And also the idea of the abdomen being covered shows a certain practice that must have been prevalent in this early Roman period in Bérénice, and repeated later also in the later period. But still, with these burials, we still have nothing that can be called anything like a Roman Egyptian burial in Bérénice. And our foray into the bunker area to the west of Bérénice shows a cliff area like here. And here's a closer look at that, which could be something like what we have in Siwa or in places like that, where possibly a tomb may have been cut into the face of it. This is the view from the top of this mound onto the site, but that is just to have a look at it. On top of that mound, on top of that hill, that is where the very disturbed graves that need to be excavated first before we can say much more about them were found. And with it, that intaglio, which together with some pottery that was found there, suggests an early Roman 1st century date for these tombs, which are at the very edge of this hill, overlooking the site as I just showed you. However, in that very area, there's this building which you didn't mention. We did a magnetic survey of that too, and there's certainly a big courtyard here leading off to the opening onto the site. It is in this part, which is between the formal cemetery and the hill with the early Roman tombs. So there is one idea that this building with the three podia could actually be connected with some kind of mausoleum function. I've already suggested to you then that we have a formal cemetery in this area, starting from here, and we shall go on to look at the cemetery here, and the formal cemetery on the hill that I just showed you. However, as you see, all these stray, so to speak, graves were found starting from the city and going all the way to the end of the Ptolemaic section of the town, which is all of no man's land, which in this period, and the early Roman period, when all these, as we think, all these graves were made, this was the trash area outside the city, no man's land basically, and to the west of the city, which is a proper position for a cemetery in Egypt. The formal cemetery that I started to talk about is located on higher ground at the entrance to the city, which is again a good position where necropolises were placed. We have dug only one trench, but the magnetic survey, which will have to be continued to cover the whole area, shows that there are several more tombs which might be quite equally well preserved as these. Excavations there in 2001 gave the effect of at least 3 phases being there. The oldest phase that was found, which are these cyst graves, could not be dated because of no grave goods. This is characteristic of the burials in Bérénice. There's no grave goods to go by. Only the stratigraphy can sometimes help. The only reason to think that this could be early is that remaking of the site gives it a coin in fill from the Vespasian, from the reign of Vespasian, which could suggest that. However, in the 4th, 5th century, this kind of compartment structure appears, and in it shafts, which is quickly redone, and the end effect is here with the structure being built up again with the shafts inside and a bench in front where the grave offerings, some kind of offerings at the cemetery were placed, and a mausoleum that in Martin Hens's reconstruction looks like this. The walls were made of coral. This is 5th century, definitely. The walls were made of coral. There was a place made for where a wooden coffin is perhaps the wrong word. It was a big box, coffin, a wooden box standing on metal with metal fittings. And inside it were disarticulated bones of two individuals. Unfortunately, everything was robbed. The robbers knew exactly how to reach the right place for whatever was inside there. What is interesting about this is that it was definitely meant to be entered. The floor inside was made of pebbles, but with gray and black pebbles added to give that kind of splotched effect, plus some ceramics, which gave the red as an additional sort of mosaic appearance. And this was used probably until the latest time in Bérénice. These profiles are just meant to give you an idea of how complicated this very small trench, it was just 6 by 9 meters, was in terms of the accumulation of different types of grave structures from a very short period of time. Because there are the cyst grave that I talked to you about in the first place. There's the shaft grave, which there's a shaft going down basically 5 meters and still going. We couldn't excavate it at the time, with the shaft being made of big slabs of stone. So we couldn't excavate it, we can't date it. Next to it, that compartment with the shaft built into it, which obviously inside this compartment, the superstructure was a kind of vaulted form, and next to it were placed, as we see here, next to the head of that, right between the wall and in this very narrow space, there's an amphora definitely used for libations. The amphora was connected with the shaft, so whatever was put into that jar went inside, was meant to go inside. Next to that, I have an idea excavating that I probably excavated through some tumuli, but without further excavations next door, I cannot check that. I didn't see that when I was excavating. However, such graves as these are suggestive of burials that are in Sudan, for instance, in Nubia, I mean, not Sudan, in Kalabsha, Wadi Kitna, these places, they have things like that. This cyst grave had a covering of 2 layers of stones, basically, and it was an infant girl with a nice set of beads, a necklace and a bracelet, and also a handful of dates that were placed next to the head as an offering, probably for the deceased. The head of the child, the body was covered with a shroud, and the head was covered with a piece of pottery, and this was very well dated by John and Felicity Wilds to the 5th century, even though I much wanted it to be earlier. And we have found similar cyst grave in the area of the early trash dump, which is supposed to be early Roman, but this burial, which here you can see a section through it, is right on the surface, and it shows that what is the early Roman trash dump was actually being used in the 5th century also for burials. And the plot thickens. The man that you showed, the burial that you showed, or rather, I don't think it's a burial. It might be somebody who really suffered an accident and ended up in that lighthouse or whatever structure it is. Next, nearby, all around the city, there are also, from this late period, these ring cairn tombs. The one up here is from Hitan Rian going south and south west of Bérénice. The others are on this mound right behind that early Roman tomb that I talked to you about. These are, and I'll show you just a few pictures. These are all typical. Probably all of them are robbed. There's some pottery there that was dated to the Middle Roman period, so that would probably be the date for all the tombs that appear around Bérénice to the west and south of it. To pass on quickly to the animals, which I just want to show you, because they are also part of death in Bérénice. This is fresh excavations with the iron collar decorated with beads that one of them had. Just to remind you where these burials were, but let's go on. This is courtesy of our archaeozoologist Marta Osypinska, who is studying this cemetery. It shows you the different kinds of forms of burial that are found there. Some of the cats, dogs, etc. were put into amphorae. There are only a few cases that can be said to be mummified, but more spontaneously than regularly. And finally, the burial of the dog covered, as is common, but at the time when we first discovered it, we thought it was special, covered with that piece of amphora, or rather a halved amphora, the two pieces being used for the different parts of it. And it has been nicely dated as a Dressel amphora to the first half of the 1st century AD, and can be considered as one of the earliest of the animal burials in this part of the town. And what was I meant? In that one place, in those few trenches, there's almost 100 animals. But to the south, in the midden there, we found 4 animals, 4 dogs, and these appeared to be part of the same tradition. As Steve said, we don't know right now. Of course, it's easy to say it's a cemetery of pets or exotic animals that were your companions of people there. There is, however, reason to think that the number of young animals that were there, the kittens and the puppies, they were somehow involved in a magic ritual concerned with divination. There is in Egyptian papyri information about the drowned having access to the other world. So perhaps in a place like Bérénice, on the outskirts of everywhere, when you're going to go on a long sea journey, perhaps you need to know whether you will come back. The conclusions, well, it covers everything that I said so far. We have at least, I counted again, 19 burials, and not all of them with the formal features, formal burial features that we would expect. We have all sexes, we have all ages from the fetus. We even have a newborn or a premature baby that was in a house in the city. But that's exceptional and normal in Egypt for newborns to be, if they die, to be buried this way. Primarily, all the burials are in no man's land, west of the town, but there is a formal cemetery, as you have seen, also extending to the hill west of the town. No grave goods, some evidence of burial shrouds and personal dress accessories, and the potsherds that you saw, or the stones, which are evidence of some kind of practices. I have been very careful to avoid any ethnic references because on this material it is not enough to go into such interpretations. That there is no formal regular Roman burials of the kind we would expect, maybe because we haven't found them, but also it's possible that anybody who was from the valley got to go back. For the late Roman period, it's again a formal cemetery that straddles the road leading into the town. That's this graves with stone. This part is really extensive, but then also, as you saw, not very homogeneous. There's so many different things going on in that little place that you wonder how can it reflect just one group of society? Then you wouldn't think that it would cover more groups. They would rather prefer to be either families or clans or ethnicities together. Everything would suggest that that formal cemetery that we have from the 4th, 5th century reflects a Blemian population with roots somewhere further south. This, I think, can be studied and confirmed. So thank you.